The empire stood vast and unchallenged, its banners stretching across the horizon like rivers of crimson and gold. Cities sparkled with marble palaces, legions marched in perfect rhythm, and every border seemed sealed beneath the weight of its iron discipline. In the eyes of its rulers, this was not merely an empire, it was civilization itself, the peak of human order carved from chaos. Beyond its frontiers, the world was dismissed as wild, untamed, and beneath notice. And yet, far beyond those borders, across an ocean of grass and sky, there lived a people who had no cities, no kings, no walls, only the wind, the horse, and the bow. They numbered barely 300, but in their hearts burned a defiance older than any empire. The story begins at the height of the empire's glory, a time when victory seemed a law of nature. The emperor's armies moved like living machines, drilled and hardened through decades of conquest. Generals boasted that not even the gods could stand against their legions. Behind their confidence lay wealth, supply lines, engineers, and strategy manuals studied for generations. But for all their mastery of sieges and formations, they knew nothing of the silent vastness that awaited them on the other side of the frontier, a land where no city stood, no map could be trusted, and no road led home once it was lost. The empire's expansion was not born from need but from pride. A border tribe had raided a caravan, small, insignificant, barely worth a footnote in the imperial annals. But insult, not logic, drove the court's response. To the nobles, it was unthinkable that barbarians could defy imperial law and live. So, they decided to make an example. Thousands of soldiers were summoned, their armor gleaming under the morning sun. Priests blessed the campaign as a cleansing fire that would wipe out the filth of the plains. The generals laughed as they marched, boasting that the steppe would soon bow before the emperor's will. The journey began with songs and drums, a river of men moving eastward into the unknown. At first, morale was high. The soldiers mocked the emptiness around them, scoffing at the idea that anyone could survive in such desolation. The sun blazed upon the dry grasslands, and the wind carried whispers that seemed like laughter. Days passed. Then weeks. The terrain stretched endlessly, swallowing sound and sense of direction. The empire's grand columns began to look small, almost fragile against the ocean of the steppe. Meanwhile, far beyond the empire's sight, a council of riders gathered beneath the night sky. Their campfires flickered like stars fallen to the earth. These were the nomads, hunters of horizon and storm. They had no written laws, yet each man knew his place. Their leader was not a king but a chosen warrior whose command came from respect, not bloodline. Around him stood men and women hardened by hunger and wind, by winters that turned breath into ice and summers that scorched the earth. They had fought wolves and invaders alike and learned one truth: survival favored those who adapted, not those who commanded. To the nomads, the empire's army was not a threat, it was an opportunity. They understood something the empire never could: the land itself was a weapon. Where the imperial soldiers saw emptiness, the nomads saw cover, escape routes, ambush points. Their horses were extensions of their bodies, their bows curved like the crescent moons that guided them at night. Every child was trained to shoot while riding at full speed, to vanish into the grass before the enemy even knew where the arrow had come from. Their tactics were not written in manuals, they were carved into instinct, passed from one generation to the next through blood and experience. As the imperial forces pushed deeper, they failed to notice how quiet the land had become. No traders, no herds, no birds. Only wind. The few scouts who rode too far ahead did not return. Whispers spread through the ranks, rumors of eyes watching from the horizon. But the commanders dismissed them as superstition, their arrogance blinding them to the truth forming in the distance. For every step the empire took forward, the step seemed to close in tighter, swallowing the certainty of its own power. By the time the army reached the central plains, they had no idea that they were already surrounded. Not by fortresses or legions, but by 300 riders who moved like shadows across the grass. Each nomad knew his role, each horse knew its path. The trap was not yet sprung, but the silence was its beginning. In that silence, history itself seemed to hold its breath. The empire thought itself invincible, a colossus of men and metal. The nomads were ghosts, forgotten, underestimated, unseen. Yet, within days, the mightiest army on earth would discover that its discipline, numbers, and pride meant nothing against the speed of wind and the cunning of men who needed nothing to survive. The plains, once empty and still, were about to become a graveyard. The empire marched forward, banners fluttering proudly, unaware that every step they took carried them closer not to victory, but to annihilation. Centuries before the silence fell over that desolate battlefield, the world was teetering on the edge of transformation. Across a vast expanse of mountains and fertile valleys, two powers had risen to dominance, each convinced that destiny favored them alone. To the west stood a disciplined, old empire, structured, wealthy, and confident in its divine right to rule. Its rulers boasted of lineage stretching back 1,000 years, its scholars believed in the permanence of their civilization, and its generals trained in doctrines refined over generations. To the east, however, a younger kingdom was growing with terrifying speed, driven by ambition, fueled by revenge, and forged through survival. Theirs was a culture born from hardship, from raids and sieges, from the belief that only through conquest could peace ever be earned. Between them lay not just a border, but an idea: who deserved to inherit the future? The documentary brings this world vividly to life. We see bustling markets in marble cities, royal courts filled with intrigue, and caravan routes linking faraway lands. Trade thrived between these empires, gold for silk, iron for spices, but so did suspicion. Every envoy's smile hid a blade behind it. The Western Empire, proud and unbending, saw its Eastern counterpart as a dangerous upstart, an uncivilized imitator daring to challenge its supremacy. Meanwhile, the Eastern king, young and restless, saw his neighbors as relics of a decaying world, a fading empire that clung to its glory like an aging warrior polishing his rusted sword. The tension between pride and progress, tradition and ambition, was no longer confined to words. It was seeping into every border skirmish, every trade dispute, every whispered rumor at court. Religious and cultural contrasts deepened the divide. The Westerners worshipped a pantheon of gods tied to stability, order, and law. The Easterners followed a fire cult that celebrated renewal through destruction, believing that through burning the old, the world could be reborn anew. Priests on both sides called the other blasphemers, proclaiming divine support for their own cause. Prophets and seers predicted a great reckoning, a storm that would sweep across both nations. Slowly, what began as trade rivalry turned into something sacred, a holy war in the minds of men who sought both power and purpose. The narrative then moves to the courts of kings, where ambition takes human form. In the West, an aging emperor struggles to hold his borders as internal politics rot his empire from within. Advisors plead for diplomacy, generals demand action, and the old ruler hesitates, haunted by the ghosts of past wars. In the East, a fiery young monarch ascends the throne after his father's mysterious death. Charismatic and ruthless, he vows to carve his name into eternity, to achieve what his ancestors could not: the total humiliation of the Western Empire. His generals, many of them veterans hardened by frontier wars, rally behind him. The sun rises from the east, he declares to his army, and soon it will set over our enemies' burning cities. Through this section, the story becomes deeply human. It's not just about armies and empires, it's about ego, faith, and fear. Both rulers are driven by visions of destiny, but blinded by pride. The emperor fights to preserve what he believes is eternal, the young king fights to destroy what he believes is decaying. Historians later would call it inevitable, the slow tightening of fate's noose. The narrator's voice deepens as he explains how every decision, every miscalculation, every ignored warning led the world one step closer to the battlefield that would erase them both. Diplomacy soon collapses under the weight of arrogance. Ambassadors sent to negotiate are dismissed or executed. Border forts are reinforced. Scouts vanish into enemy lands. Rumors spread of an Eastern army massing beyond the river valleys, its soldiers marked by crimson banners and strange war drums that echo at night. The Western court mocks the threat, calling it noise from the wilderness. They laugh at reports of barbarian discipline, unaware that the enemy has studied their every tactic, their every weakness. Meanwhile, the Eastern king interprets the laughter as an insult that must be avenged. As the drums of war grow louder, ordinary people feel the dread long before the kings do. Farmers flee from borderlands, temples are emptied of their treasures, and poets write verses about the coming fire. The documentary paints this buildup with both grandeur and sorrow, panoramic shots of armies mobilizing, priests blessing weapons, blacksmiths hammering the final swords. The narrator notes that war often begins not when one side strikes first, but when both sides believe they can no longer afford to be afraid. That moment had come. The section closes with a powerful visual sequence, dawn breaking over the borderlands. Two armies, unseen to each other but moving closer with every hour, march toward fate. Horses snort in the cold, armor glints in the weak light, and the sound of thousands of boots crushes the earth. The narrator's voice lowers to a whisper as he delivers the chilling transition. And then, one morning, beneath a blood-colored sky, they marched toward a battlefield that history itself would forget. The morning of the march was deceptively calm. A pale mist rolled across the plains, blurring the horizon, muting the sound of distant movement. Neither side could see the other, yet both armies felt the same tightening in their chests, the silent recognition that their world was about to change forever. The Western army, disciplined and orderly, advanced in perfect formation. Each soldier bore the sigil of the eagle, emblem of an empire that once commanded continents. Veterans whispered prayers to the gods of their ancestors, while new recruits tried to mask their trembling hands. Their general, a man shaped by decades of warfare, rode along the front lines, his eyes cold, unreadable. To him, this was not a battle, it was the test of whether the old order still deserved to rule. Across the river valley, the eastern host stirred like a living storm. Thousands of men clad in scaled armor stood beneath crimson banners, their shields painted with the symbol of the rising sun. They had marched for weeks, crossing deserts and mountains, carrying with them not only weapons but vengeance. Their king, young and brilliant, had promised his warriors eternal glory. He spoke not of mere victory, but of renewal, that through this war, a new age would be born. To his soldiers, he was more than a ruler, he was destiny made flesh. The eastern drums thundered, deep and rhythmic, shaking the air. Scouts reported that the Western army was near, separated only by a narrow stretch of forest and fog. Orders were given to prepare the lines, sharpen the blades, and ready the signal fires. The narrator explains that the road to the battlefield was paved with arrogance and prophecy. Each side had convinced itself of divine favor. In the Western camp, priests performed rituals of purification, anointing soldiers with sacred oil. In the Eastern lines, fire priests lit great pyres, sending pillars of smoke into the dawn. The camera lingers on faces, soldiers clutching charms from loved ones, commanders scanning the sky for omens. Every man felt the weight of something far greater than politics. They were marching not only to fight an enemy, but to defend a worldview, a civilization, a sense of purpose. The geography of the land plays a crucial role. The field lay between two ridges, bordered by dense woodland and a narrow river cutting across the center. Strategically, it was a death trap. Whoever controlled the high ground would dominate the battle, but the fog made reconnaissance impossible. The Western general, confident in his experience, chose to wait for better visibility before advancing. The Eastern king, impatient and burning with pride, decided to attack immediately. That single decision would seal the fate of both armies. The narrator pauses here, allowing the tension to build, emphasizing how in history's greatest tragedies, the smallest choices often determine the outcome. The scene then shifts to the soldiers' preparations. We see the meticulous arrangement of shields, the feeding of horses, the whisper of prayers as blades are drawn from their scabbards. The narrator describes the eerie quiet before battle, the kind of silence that makes the heart race, when even the birds refuse to sing. Letters were written that morning, messages to families that would never be sent. A Western soldier, anonymous in the ranks, writes to his wife, "If I do not return, know that I fought for our name, for the world we believed in." His letter, found centuries later in a sealed urn, becomes one of the only surviving testaments of the day that would follow. Then comes the first tragic error. Scouts sent to flank the enemy vanish into the fog and never return. The Western general assumes they were ambushed and, in anger, orders his cavalry forward prematurely. At the same time, the Eastern king mistakes the movement as a full-scale advance and commands his archers to fire. Arrows rain down, unseen targets hit unseen enemies. Horses panic, formations collapse, and chaos begins before either side even makes visual contact. The narrator underscores the bitter irony. A battle meant to prove glory begins instead with confusion, friendly fire, and fear. As the morning deepens, the sun begins to burn away the mist, revealing what no one expected. The armies are far closer than believed. They see each other suddenly, shockingly, at a distance too short for proper maneuver. Trumpets sound, drums roar, and men scream as they rush forward. There is no time for strategy, no room for retreat. The meticulously planned battle turns into a desperate melee. The narrator describes it as a collision of pride and panic, the moment when order dissolves into instinct. Emotionally, this section plunges the viewer into dread. Every sound, the clash of iron, the screams, the thunder of hooves, feels suffocating. We are reminded that war is not waged by empires but by individuals trapped in moments of chaos. The narrator's tone grows somber, reflecting on how the march to battle was not heroic but doomed from the start. The road to oblivion was not marked by destiny. It was paved by human blindness. The section ends on the edge of the abyss. As smoke thickens and the first fires spread across the dry fields, the camera lingers on the faces of commanders realizing that control has already been lost. Both leaders, separated by a few hundred paces, stare into the inferno they've unleashed. The narrator delivers the final line with chilling finality, and as the sun climbed higher, the world held its breath. The battle that would vanish from history had begun. The Empire's army marched into the misty plains at dawn, confident and unaware that death waited beneath their feet. Asha's 300 riders had chosen the perfect terrain, a shallow basin ringed with tall grass and low hills. When the first nomad arrows hissed through the morning air, the Empire's generals laughed, thinking it a skirmish. But pride turned to panic as more arrows rained down, invisible and unending. The cavalry charged, their formation tight and glittering, but the nomads were already gone. They appeared and vanished like ghosts, striking from behind and the sides. The plains erupted into chaos, dust clouds, screams, and the endless whine of arrows slicing through armor. The Empire's discipline disintegrated. Drums faltered, commands broke apart. The soldiers tried to form ranks, but every step met confusion. Asha rode through the storm, calm and precise, his bow singing with each release. His men moved like extensions of the wind, shooting, retreating, and striking again. The Empire's strength became its weakness, its mass trapped within its own bulk. By midday, the army was in ruin. The general fell with an arrow through his throat. The banners collapsed beside him. The nomads encircled what remained, closing in like a tightening noose. For the Empire's survivors, the sky itself seemed to fall. And when silence finally came, the wind carried away their last cries, leaving only the steppe, and the lesson that numbers mean nothing when the land itself fights against you. Morning revealed only devastation. The Empire's army lay broken, armor scattered like dead leaves across the grass. Ravens circled above the silence. The 300 nomads moved among the bodies, offering no triumph, only respect. For them, victory was survival, not glory. The few imperial survivors staggered home, haunted and unrecognizable. Their tales spread like wildfire, of invisible horsemen, of arrows from the dark, of a battlefield that seemed alive. In the imperial capital, disbelief turned to rage. Generals were executed, chroniclers silenced. But truth travels quietly, and whispers reached the borders. The Empire had been defeated by 300 riders. On the steppe, Asha stood upon a ridge watching the smoke fade. Around him, the land returned to stillness. His people had endured, but he knew the Empire would not forget. Yet he also knew this: No empire could ever master the wind. The steppe belonged to no one. As months passed, the empire's power began to waver. Its enemies grew bolder, its subjects restless. One battle had changed everything, not through conquest, but by shattering the illusion of invincibility. The nomads buried their dead and moved on, leaving no monuments. Only the land remembered. And beneath the endless grass, the bones of both conqueror and defier slept side by side, their story whispered forever through the wind. Centuries passed, but the tale endured. The empire that had once ruled continents was now forgotten dust, yet the legend of 300 riders lived on. Historians argued about what truly destroyed the empire, whether pride or fate, but the truth was simple: adaptation triumphed over arrogance. The nomads had proven that mastery of movement, patience, and the land itself could overcome any army. Their tactics became the blueprint for future conquerors, from Attila to Genghis Khan, each carrying echoes of Asha's unseen war. Yet beyond strategy, the story's heart was human: freedom against domination, humility against pride. Civilizations rose and fell, but the steppe remained unchanged. The grass grew over bones, the wind erased names, and only the lesson endured, that strength means nothing without understanding the world you stand upon. Today, if you stand on that same horizon, you can still feel it: the hum beneath your feet, the ghost of hooves in the wind. No monuments mark the site, no empire claims the victory. Only the earth remembers. They came with banners and drums, believing the world could be conquered. The steppe answered with silence. And in that silence, the truth survived: freedom, once born, can never be defeated.